In part 5 of our Cash and Liability Mastery series, we're going to talk about debt and borrowing. We'll look at when to borrow and how to borrow smart. First, we have to define what is borrowing. When you borrow money, you have immediate spending power now at the cost of reduced future spending power. You must pay that money back with interest using money you make in the future. When you borrow, you are actually borrowing from your future self because that is who has to pay it back. We're going to go back to our buckets. We had our cash flow bucket, our 90-day savings bucket for reserves, and then our 90-plus day bucket for building wealth for the future, wealth that will someday fill that cash flow bucket. When you borrow, you add a fourth bucket. If you want to borrow $1,200 at 10%, it's important to understand what happens. Today, that $1,200 goes into your green bucket for current spending, but you are creating an obligation that will have to be paid back from future earnings. It's like you now have a little hole in that bucket. Now that it is borrowed, you have to pay it back. Let's say you pay it back at $35 a month because that fits into your cash flow. That means it's going to take you 41 months to pay it back, and you will have paid $219 in interest. If you're borrowing on a credit card, say, and the rate is 21%, now, even if you're paying $40 a month instead of $35, it's going to take you 43 months to pay it back, and you'll end up paying $516 in interest. Let's look at how this works in the buckets. You have $1,200 to spend a day, but in doing so, you now have a $35 a month payment that needs to come out of your green bucket every month now for the next 41 months. That's $35 you won't have to put in your 90-day or 90-day plus bucket. Where is that $35 going? It's going to your borrowing bucket. So for 41 months, present self is returning money to future self, and over time, $1,419 will be going into that borrowing bucket. Why is this so important? Your goal is to avoid having less money in the green bucket than your monthly expenses. By borrowing, you're creating an obligation that makes it more difficult to save. The question becomes, when does it make sense to borrow? There are three types of debt: bad debt, neutral debt, and good debt. Bad debt is essentially anything with a higher interest rate and anything used to purchase a depreciating asset. This debt does not make sense to borrow against your future self for. Credit cards should be for convenience and credit building only, and paid off each month. Find a high reward card with no annual cost, pay it in full monthly. This builds credit, provides rewards, helps with tracking, and provides a level of insurance. If you need a personal loan, you might want to check in on a friends and family rate, and I would never advise a payday loan. Auto loans are generally considered neutral debt. We generally have to have an auto, and they need to be replaced. Rates are typically low, but they are a depreciating asset. Ideally, you'd save and pay cash. Be aware, though, in this, you still have an opportunity cost of losing the invested funds. If you're in that position, it's important to look at the cost of borrowing versus where you have the money. For instance, if your invested dollars are earning 5% and you can get a car loan for 3%, then the loan probably makes more sense. Also, keep in mind that every year you keep an older car, you maximize its durable value to you. Some key markers of good debt are a relatively low interest rate, it purchases an appreciating asset, and could possibly have tax benefits. Student loans could be seen in this light if you are investing in yourself and can see a justifiable return on the investment. A mortgage will allow you to purchase a long-term appreciating asset and can help you to leverage the equity in that asset. When looking to see if mortgage debt makes sense, you must consider the cost of renting, since most of us like to live indoors, so one way or the other you will be paying for housing. For this illustration, we're going to say you find a 4% 30-year mortgage. You get a $250,000 loan, and your principal and interest payment is $1,424 a month. This is higher than your rent payment of $1,250 a month. So does it make sense? Well, we're going to assume an appreciation rate of 4% as well. And on the home you own, you've made $512,640 in payments versus the $450,000 you made in rent payments. So it seems like you would have been $62,000 richer renting. But because you now own the home and it is now worth $973,000, your net on your balance sheet is $460,000 to the positive after you subtract the payments. In the renting situation, you've made your landlord wealthier by $450,000. Now, renting, you could have been investing the difference, but in all likelihood, your landlord would have been raising the rent payments over this time span as well. Also, you're going to need to continue renting, whereas the homeowner's mortgage is now paid off. In the next segment, we'll talk about what to do if you are already in debt and how to use the debt snowball to get out.